Hello and welcome to another Writerly Witterings. And now we're coming on to another of my inspirational authors. And you can see his books all along that row there. Patrick O'Brian. He wrote books that were absolutely in the middle of the Napoleonic Wars. To an extent, I suppose it's true that he's a follower on from C.S. Forester with the Hornblower series. And a lot of people have said actually his books are a bit too larger than life. They're a little bit extreme and over the top. Well, the books follow the careers of two officers in the Royal Navy through the Napoleonic sea battles. There was the young Aubrey and then the slightly older Maturin. Aubrey was the commander of the ships, and Maturin was supposedly a surgeon, but in reality he was also a spy. And both of them are superb characters, really well rounded. The naval officer is written down as a rather larger than life fellow. He's the sort of character you'd imagine would have gone through the rugby team at school. Wouldn't have done enormously well at his exams, but he would have been very popular with most of the other fellows. Maturin is a much darker character because he's a Roman Catholic at a time when Catholicism was scorned and frowned upon. He's also Irish, which puts him at a slight disadvantage in London society. And the two of them meet in the first book, Master and Commander. They're thrown together to an extent, and their relationship and friendship develops and strengthens all the way through the books. And there is a huge amount going on because with a small ship, Aubrey manages to capture a much larger vessel. Patrick O'Brian goes through the sort of rather corrupt but also very efficient methods that they had of motivating the sailors in those days, which is basically to pay them a lot of money when they caught a prize. So you see Aubrey going from close to poverty, suddenly getting fabulously wealthy, and then seeing all of that disappear when there's speculations and his money is completely frittered away. Not from his fault, but because he trusted bankers, I suppose you could say, pretty much like us in 2008. Not me personally, I mean the world, not me. So they have real ups and downs, even in one book ending up being shipwrecked on an island in the roaring 40s and wondering how on earth they're going to get out of it. So yes, some people reckon these books are just too overblown. One thing I would say is that Patrick O'Brian makes absolutely no concessions for your lack of knowledge of naval language, sailing, or anything else come to that. Basically, if you want to learn what futtocks are and all of the other things that he brings up, you need to get a dictionary and just look them up. It's easier, to be honest, to just go with the flow and accept the fact you don't understand half his terminology. It does sort of become a little bit more clear when you read the books, but there's still an awful lot of language that is incomprehensible to the average fellow today. But it's just a demonstration that he has done a huge amount of research. In comparison, I have recently read, and I've got to record a review of a modern day thriller. That writer obviously did a lot of research, and you can tell because the whole damn lot's in the book, and it is a deeply uncomfortable book to read because you're swallowing so much, to my way of thinking, turgid nonsense. With the Patrick O'Brian books, you're not thrown a load of information that is completely unnecessary. So he uses the right terminology when he's talking about the ship. If you want to go and find out what that terminology is, that's great, you can do it. But he doesn't give you 5 pages of explanation about what a futtock is. He just mentions it and goes on to the next theme of the story. He's keeping the pace going all the time. Brian himself was quite an interesting character, because I remember when he was still alive that there were quite a few reports that he had completely invented his whole life story. That makes a lot of people very nervous. There is a belief nowadays that an author should be entirely open about his or her life and everything to do with it. I don't subscribe to that view, partly because I don't think that you need to know everything about an author to be able to enjoy his or her work, but also because many really good authors, and I include myself in this, are not very good with coping with facts and the real world. And the reason is that we are much like other people, and if you have an argument with someone, very often you will reflect on that argument later and think, I should have said this, or I should have said that. Now that, unfortunately, is a process that authors are going through 24 hours a day. We are constantly thinking not just about an argument that we may have had with our friends or family, we're also thinking about the arguments that the characters we've invented might be having. So at any time in any day, I am constantly thinking of the 7 leading characters in the book I'm currently writing. And I can't turn them off. They're in there. They're all squabbling. And that has an impact. It has the result that very often something can be said to me and I will either mishear it, because I'm so damn deaf. If I don't mishear it, I'll misinterpret it potentially, or I will replay it in my mind and imagine what I thought probably should have been said, or could have been said, or maybe was said, but I don't know. And those all get very confused 2-3 weeks later when my daughter says, but I told you about this. You might have done, but I don't remember that, or at least not that way. So I think all authors are constantly inventing. No novelist is a reliable witness. Bear that in mind. And he certainly was not a reliable witness about his own life or anything else. But that doesn't matter, because his books are stunning. Now, the other thing, which I've mentioned several times, is that people say his books are unrealistic, far too overblown, and everything else. Well, at this point, I will pick up this book, The Audacious Admiral Cochrane. Now, at this point, having just disposed of the dog that was whining very loudly at the gate, I will pick up this book, The Audacious Admiral Cochrane, The True Life of a Naval Legend. And if you see this book, it's a very nice book, written by Brian Vale. Brian Vale was the author of another book called Jack Aubrey Commands, which is an historical companion to the Peter O'Brien series. And what Vale did was he looked up to see where Patrick O'Brien got the idea for Aubrey. And where he got the idea for from Aubrey was Cochrane. Cochrane was a guy who started out at the same time as Aubrey did. He was Royal Naval Captain, a respected inventor, Vice Admiral of Chile, First Admiral of Brazil, lived from 1775 to 1860 and achieved legendary status. His reputation for audacity and bravery was first established in 1801 during the encounter between the Speedy and El Gamo, when his diminutive 14-gun brig completely overwhelmed and captured the 32-gun Spanish frigate. So very much the story of Master and Commander. It was sealed by his later exploits as a frigate captain in the cruises of the Pallas and Imperieuse, during which he put his aggressive orders into brilliant effect, seizing prizes, making raids, creating panic, doobie-doobie-doo. When the Stock Exchange scandal of 1814 resulted in his expulsion from the Navy, again very much like Aubrey, he took his skills to South America and etc, etc. This basically was the blueprint for Jack Aubrey. Naval officers in the British Navy in those days were not gentlemen who sat quietly and followed orders and did nothing else. They were independent commanders in their own right. Every man jack of them on a ship was in charge of his own ship, was utterly independent. He couldn't radio for help. He couldn't radio to get permission to go and attack a foreign ship. He went and did it because he was the British Navy. If we were at war, then he had the right to go and attack. And so he did. And they would attack even against overwhelming odds. One of the main delightful aspects of Jack Aubrey is his constant reflections on Lord Nelson, who he served under, and how brave he was, and how it was the policy of the British Navy not to muck about with fancy sailing tactics, but just to go straight at the enemy and fight him. And that was the whole process that the British Navy fought under in those days. Glorious days for those chaps, especially for the ones who took big prizes, because it was the creation of their fortunes. But Patrick O'Brian, an inspirational author because he made no concessions for other people's knowledge or lack of it. He wrote extremely good stories that were very well researched, very true to life. He explained what life was really like, and he put it down on paper in a thoroughly delightful manner. I would thoroughly recommend, personally, that you read Master and Commander, and if that grabs you, you've got a total of 21 books. It's going to cost you, but it's worth it. It's a journey that's worth going on. Hope you enjoyed that. I did. I would also recommend, if you see it, Cochrane, The True Life of a Naval Legend by Brian Vale, published by Conway Books. Very good, very interesting, and it gives you a different perspective on life in the 1800s. And that's that. Right, I better finish my tea now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, hit the bell beside it. Any comments about other authors I should be looking at? I will next be looking at Graham Greene, I think, because he's there right next to all of the Patrick O'Briens. So I hope you'll look forward to seeing that as much as I'm going to look forward to actually recording it. Take care, thanks for watching. Cheers.